This is one of the historical realities of the Strait of Hormuz.
Scattered across the floor of the Persian Gulf are the remains of ancient shipwrecks, their hulls still holding the lost cargo of vanished empires. These ships were once the primary way wealth moved across the world, but they were lost because they were forced into a geographic corner they couldn't escape. To understand how this water became a graveyard for ancient gold, we must examine the history of the world's most dangerous trade route. If you're ready to dive in, hit that like button and subscribe to join us for the journey. That trade route is the Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow passage that connects the Indian Ocean to the Middle East. In ancient times, nearly every luxury item, from Indian spices and exotic timber to Arabian frankincense, had to squeeze through this one specific opening. For a merchant fleet, entering this gap was a massive risk. The water was shallow, the winds were unreliable, and the shoreline was perfectly designed for local raiders to wait in silence. Because of its unique shape, the strait worked like a massive natural funnel. It pushed slow, heavy ships full of gold and luxury goods directly into a series of prepared ambush zones. This map shows the two sides of the trap. At the bottom, you have the southern shore of Arabia, and at the top, you have the northern shore of Iran. On the southern side, the mountains drop straight into the sea, forming narrow inlets. These hidden coves were perfect spots for raiders to park their boats. From inside these gaps, they could watch the main sea lanes while remaining completely invisible to passing merchants. Across the water on the northern shore, a cluster of islands created a shallow, confusing maze. If a raider was pursued, they could vanish into these uncharted channels, where a heavy, deep-bellied merchant ship would quickly run aground. These vertical cliffs gave the raiders another massive advantage. From high above, lookouts could spot a target hours before it even entered the strait, giving the crews below plenty of time to get into position. But the real trigger for the trap was the water itself. In this narrow channel, the currents become erratic and unpredictable. A heavy ship loaded with metal or timber would often lose its ability to steer, slowing down to a crawl just as it reached the most dangerous part of the journey. The geography of the strait was a perfect net. It combined high lookout points and hidden alleys with difficult water that forced the world's richest ships to move as slowly as possible. The people who mastered this terrain were local coastal tribes. Ancient historians called them the fish eaters because their entire lives were shaped by the shoreline and the resources they could pull from the sea. Living on these dry, rocky coasts was an extreme challenge. There was almost no fresh water, and traditional farming was impossible. For these tribes, raiding passing merchant fleets wasn't just a choice, it was a survival strategy to bring wealth and resources into an area that had almost none. Their tactics relied on speed. Instead of one large ship, dozens of small, light wooden boats would emerge from the hidden coves all at once. They would swarm a single merchant vessel, surrounding it from every side before the defenders could even prepare their weapons. This was their ultimate tactical edge. While the heavy merchant ships were trapped by the slow currents and the wind, these light boats could row circles around them, striking quickly and vanishing before anyone could react. These raids were so effective, they threatened the stability of entire empires. Ancient leaders in Mesopotamia relied on this sea trade for the copper and stone they needed to build their cities. If the trade stopped, their economies would fail. In response, merchants began turning their ships into floating fortresses. They built high wooden towers on the decks, allowing archers to fire down at the swarming pirate boats from a protected height. For the most valuable royal treasures, kings even began deploying dedicated naval squadrons. These were the world's first true maritime escorts, meant to guard gold and timber as they passed through the dangerous strait. Even with these defenses, the raids continued. The geography was simply too favorable for the hunters, and as long as the riches kept flowing, the ambushes in the strait never truly stopped. Centuries of this constant conflict turned the Strait of Hormuz into a vast underwater graveyard. For every ship that made it through, many others were lost to the currents or the raids. This history suggests that beneath the shallow island channels and inside the hidden coastal caves, ancient fortunes are likely still waiting to be discovered. These are the treasures that were pulled into the labyrinth and never came back out. It leaves us with a fascinating question. How many of these ancient hoards are still sitting just a few feet beneath the sand or the surf, waiting for someone to find them? The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most vital maritime bottlenecks, a place where geography and history have combined to create the ultimate treasure trap. Let us know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical mysteries. Look closely at this carving of the Persian ruler Darius the Great. When he consolidated the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BCE, he inherited a bleeding wound on his trade routes. The Strait of Hormuz was swarming with coastal raiders, and localized, village-level skirmishes were failing completely to stop them. Darius realized that chasing individual pirate skiffs was a waste of resources. Securing a geographic bottleneck of this scale required abandoning small patrols for a massive, heavily engineered counter-piracy doctrine. This map illustrates the Achaemenid solution, dividing the strait into 3 tactical zones. The first pillar denied safe havens. By annexing both the northern Iranian coastline and the southern Arabian shore, the empire erased the lawless territories where raiders could dock and refit. The second pillar relied on imperial engineering. Achaemenid builders constructed a continuous network of watchtowers positioned high up along the limestone cliffs that overlook the narrowest parts of the strait. You can see in this photo how these rugged limestone cliffs create natural, hidden bays, perfect cover for small pirate craft. The Persian lookouts stationed above countered this geography by using smoke signals by day and fire signals at night to instantly alert naval commanders the moment a raider slipped out of the coves. Which brings us to the third pillar, heavy marine interception. Once a signal was spotted, the Achaemenid navy deployed heavily armed triremes. The pirates relied on agility, but they were hopelessly outmatched when cornered in the shallows and splintered by armored Persian warships, carrying elite marine infantry and composite archers. This network effectively suppressed piracy for generations. However, it was incredibly expensive. The entire system relied on the sheer weight, wealth, and survival of the central Achaemenid state to stay operational. That central authority shattered following the conquests of the man depicted in this marble bust, Alexander the Great. Without the Achaemenid crown to fund watchtowers and fleets, maritime security in the Persian Gulf fractured. This collapse in security created a dangerous paradox during the Hellenistic and early Parthian periods. The military patrols vanished exactly as international trade began to explode. Trade routes expanding between Roman Egypt, the Parthian Empire, and the Satavahana Kingdom of India meant that unprecedented volumes of wealth, especially gold and silver, were suddenly funneling blindly into the volatile strait. As this map shows, the convergence of unprotected heavy trade and a narrow geographic bottleneck resulted in a golden boom for a new generation of pirate clans. They swarmed the choke point to bleed the merchant routes dry. The Roman historian Strabo recorded that merchant vessels sailing into the Indian Ocean could no longer rely on state protection. Private traders were forced to hire their own cohorts of heavily armed archers, turning commercial galleys into floating fortresses. The Parthian Empire attempted to manage the bleeding by establishing customs outposts along the northern shores. They forced merchant ships to sail in tightly packed, heavily armed royal convoys. But the convoy system was merely a defensive stopgap. It shielded individual fleets from immediate plunder, but the hostile geography of the choke point remained outside their control, allowing the pirate clans to survive and regroup. The final pacification of the strait arrived with the men in this rock relief, the Sasanian kings. Founder Ardashir I and later Shapur II realized that a Sasanian monopoly on the maritime Silk Road required total domination. Defense was no longer enough. Look at this harsh, multicolored terrain. The Sasanians militarized the local geography, that turning islands directly inside the strait, like Kesh, Hormuz, and Kish, into permanent, heavily supplied naval fortresses. Shapur II then escalated from defense to total offense. He launched large-scale amphibious campaigns across the strait, crossing the water to systematically crush pirate strongholds deeply entrenched along the coast of eastern Arabia. With the opposing coast pacified and the island fortresses established, the empire deployed a royal maritime police force to permanently guard the commercial sea lanes from shore to shore. These brutal campaigns achieved total pacification. The Strait of Hormuz was transformed from a lawless pirate haven into the most heavily policed maritime gateway in the ancient world. This era, known as the Pax Sassanica, allowed global wealth to flow unchecked. Artifacts like this white and blue porcelain jar illustrate how merchant ships carrying silk, porcelain, and spices from China and India could transit the strait without any threat of plunder. By guaranteeing this safe passage, the Sasanians extracted immense wealth. Textiles like this intricate silk tunic represent the absolute, highly lucrative monopoly the empire maintained over all maritime Silk Road goods passing into their territory. Looking at this modern topographical visualization of the Strait of Hormuz, we see a geographic cycle repeated for millennia. The Achaemenid and Sasanian eras illustrate a consistent rule. Wherever massive wealth funnels through a narrow gateway, piracy flourishes unless a dominant naval power intervenes. The intense counter-piracy doctrines forged along these rugged coastlines thousands of years ago established the foundations of maritime security that still govern the world's most critical choke point today.